Still not sure about that. My name is Phil Mace. Today I'm going to talk to you about the Bank of Efland, located in Efland, obviously. This is the bank building. It's the post office. And the house in the background is Charles Taylor's house. He actually owned the buildings. And the scene you see here is the aftermath of a robbery. There's another building associated with this story, which is next door, the Forest and Forest store. And for those of you who might not be familiar with Efland, we're located on Interstate 8540. Here's the railroad tracks, and the area we're going to be talking about is right in here. This is 1955. This is the bank. We're still there then. The Forest and Forest store was still there. This is Mount Welling Road coming from the interstate. The railroad tracks. The depot here. This is another view during a snowstorm. You can see the depot, the Forest and Forest store, and the bank right here. The bank was chartered in 1920, an authorized capital of $25,000 and $10,000 paid in by J.I. Clayton, C.M. Pope, and Dan Graham of Efland. This is the certificate of incorporation. And here are the original stockholders. J.I. Clayton of Efland, C.M. Pope, Cedar Grove, Dan Graham of Efland. All three of these were farmers. Dan Graham was also a house painter. Here's R.B. Studebaker, was the station manager for the North Carolina Railroad. You can see most everyone had one or two shares. Here's G.F. Crutchfield. He was a local teacher. John Beatty was a carpenter. Charles Taylor, who owned the buildings, was a conductor on the North Carolina Railroad. John L. Efland was a local business owner. He owned several businesses in Efland, the hosier mill, the flour mill, and some other businesses. S.C. Forrest and E.G. Forrest ran the Forest and Forest store. J.H. Murray was my great-grandfather. He was a farmer and had a sawmill operation. Say John L. Efland was the largest stockholder with 6 shares. Everyone else had 1, 2, or sometimes 3 shares. There's 68 stockholders altogether. They brought 100 shares of stock, and the bank went into business. And apparently, they were pretty thrifty. They ran this ad in the Raleigh News and Observer where they were looking for second-hand bank fixtures. They opened on the 1st of December of 1920 with John L. Efland as president and Robert Riley as cashier. It's the status at the end of 1920, 1 month from opening. And I found it interesting that they already had $86.34 worth of overdrafts in 1 month. Here are a few artifacts, some checks written on the back. Forest and Forest General Store, and E.D. Thompson, who was Ernest Dudley Thompson, who wrote a check to C.B. Ellis Music Store in Burlington. And here's some of Frank Pratt's checks from his service station in Efland in 1926, I believe. And this is a passbook savings account book. Back before computers, even long before computers. You took this book to the bank, and the cashier marked up your interest on your savings account. If you made a deposit, you took the book in, and they marked the deposit in this book. And for those of you who know what this is, you're showing your age. Well, things seem to be going along pretty smoothly. This newspaper report said things were looking good. And then in December 1925, 3 bandits robbed the Bank of Efland. They get $2,500 in the bank, lock the cashier up in the vault. They rifle the drawer and vault and speed away in a high-powered car. This article describes what happened. Riley was by himself when the men entered. They drew pistols on him. He described what they drove up in and how they were dressed and their description. And according to the News and Observer, the citizens of this little town this morning were given the biggest thrill of their lives when 3 white men driving a high-powered sedan automobile walked into the Bank of Efland, pulled their revolvers, took $2,500, locked Robert Riley, the cashier, in the vault, and quietly walked out of the bank and escaped. And they described them as heading east until they reached the edge of Hillsborough, where they were said to have turned north toward Danville. Riley went on to describe his ordeal, and he said he was in the bank working when 3 men came in, one of them slipping a $200 bill through the window and asking it to be changed. I reached in the money drawer and was preparing to give the man his change when the largest man in the group remarked, "While you're in there, you might as well hand us all of it," at the same time drawing a revolver. I was ordered to stand in the corner of the bank with my face toward the wall, the big man, who apparently was the leader of the trio, telling me that if I turned around, he would kill me on the spot. I was then ordered to go into the vault, and when I pleaded with them not to put me in there, that it would do no good because they'd already secured all the money, the big fellow told me he would give me just 1 second to get into the vault. I obeyed his order, and the door was quickly shut, and the combination in the vault turned, locking me in. After he was sure they were gone, he began to call for help. Someone came into the bank, but they didn't hear him and left. Eventually, someone did hear him, and they notified the bank president at the time, M.P. Efland, who opened the vault after working with the combination for half an hour. In talking with some people around town, no one really remembered this robbery. No one really had ever heard of it. And one person I talked to said that he always heard that Robert Riley drilled a hole in the wall of the bank vault, so that in case he was ever locked in the vault, he would have air to breathe. And I suspect this happened right after this robbery. C.H. Hedgewood, Charles Secrease, and Brian Gibson of High Point were arrested Saturday, charged with having robbed the Bank of Efland several weeks ago. Robert Riley, cashier of the bank, identified Hedgewood as one of the robbers, but could not swear to the other 2, and they were turned loose. A later article names 2 robbers in custody, C.D. Hagwood and Wirt Davis. Another suspect was Troy Fitzgerald, an habitual thief from Guilford County. He turned state's evidence and then committed suicide while awaiting trial. He strangled himself with a sheet. Eventually, 3 men went to trial for robbing the bank: Clarence D. Hagwood, Bill Payne, and Wirt Davis. All 3 were found guilty. They were sentenced to terms 7 to 10 years for Hagwood and Payne, and from 2 to 5 years for Worth Davis. Little is known about Hagwood's life after he served his sentence. Worth Davis served a few years and was released, but resumed a life of crime afterwards. In 28, he received a 10-year sentence for robbing a Hemingway, South Carolina bank. Bill Payne served a couple of years and escaped. Caught, he escaped again, and totally escaped 6 times. In between his prison stays, he occupied himself by robbing banks and stores, sometimes taking hostages, sometimes hijacking cars after ditching his getaway vehicles. He became very well known, operating all over the state of North Carolina, in Indiana, and at times in South Carolina. The Efland Bank was his second bank robbery. In 1937, during a gunfight in Buncombe County, Payne killed a highway patrolman. He even made J. Edgar Hoover's public enemy list before being captured in Sanford. And was executed at Central Prison on July 1st, 1938. In 1928, another attempt was made to rob the bank, but nothing was taken. It was never discovered who blew the vault door. Then, 1st of November 1930, the big robbery. Efland merchant kills bank robber. One man in waiting auto made his escape. Dead man is believed to be a Durham citizen. F. Carl Forrest did the shooting. The robber was shot down as he left the bank with several $100s in pocket. They have the initial wrong for the shooter. It's actually Stephen Caldwell Carl Forrest, Sr. Mr. Forrest ran the Forrest and Forrest Bank next door. The news traveled across the country. There's articles here from Alabama, Texas, Montana, Utah. The News and Observer article about the robbery again has Carl Forrest's name wrong. They identified the dead man as Bruce Carpenter from Durham. The robbery was foiled because Mrs. George Chambly came to the bank and was warned not to go in the bank. The man outside in the car said, "Lady, you can't go in there now. We're attending to some business." She's sensing something wrong. Mrs. Chambly went next door to the Forrest and Forrest store and said something is wrong over at the bank. Mr. Forrest happened to have a new double-barrel shotgun in the store. He kept it there loaded because it was a hawk that he wanted to take care of. He picked it up, went out to the bank about 50 yards away. He was commanded to halt by the man in the car. He saw in his hands what appeared to be a rifle. About this time, Carpenter backed out, pistol in hand, wheeled and fired twice at Mr. Forrest. Carpenter had been warned by his Confederate who had raced his motor and blown his horn that he was likely to face trouble. The driver also fired, his shots going wild. The first load Mr. Roberts fired into Carpenter staggered him. but he kept to his feet and made an effort to reach the car. He had almost succeeded when the second charge failed him. His buddy reached out in the effort to pull him in, failed, and fled from the scene. During the course of the robbery, he caught Robert Riley and J.L. Efland preparing a bank payroll for the Efland hosier mill. Throw him up, the bandit spoke. Riley made an attempt to crowd in on the man, intending to grapple with him if he could get near enough, but Carpenter threatened to shoot if crowded. While he was working, the yegg said to Mr. Riley, "Yeah, you identified the fellows that came in here before. I want to tell you now that if you ever identify me, I'll get you. If I don't, I'll have a buddy who will. Understand?" Hardly before he finished giving the cashier and citizen their instructions, the man outside in the car had given an alarm signal. Mr. Riley said Carpenter became shaky then, visibly nervous as he backed toward the door. He revealed that he expected to meet somebody. That's why he wheeled the fire as he left. There was something amateurish about the job. Carpenter did not act the part of a daring, experienced yeggman on the job, and his buddy outside failed him when he let Mrs. Shamley get away from the scene to the store to spread the alarm. R.B. Studebaker, Southern Railway agent at Efland, hearing the firing outside, grabbed his old-style gun and entered into the fray. He was reported to have broken Carpenter's arm with a blow from the gun as he attempted to rise on one elbow to fire his pistol. That arm that held the gun was snapped. Dr. S.A. Nathan of Chapel Hill, Orange County coroner, with the assistance of Sheriff W.T. Sloan, said of Hillsborough, impaneled a jury and held a hearing in the bank, at the conclusion of which Mr. Forrest was said to have killed Carpenter in self-defense. The Durham Sun version of the robbery is a little different. When you're ready to begin shooting, just fire away, Forrest said. After being fired upon, Forrest turned and emptied a shotgun into the man, killing him instantly. No mention of Mr. Studebaker in this article. The automobile they used was described as a Buick Master 6 Coupe of a bright yellow color. It's not known about the state license plate. There was a young man from Roanoke, Virginia, who was arrested and then released. He turned out to be on his way to the UNC football game in Chapel Hill. The bank robber, Bruce Carpenter, was from the small community of Carpenter, which is on Highway 55 between Durham and Apex. He once tried to hold up his own brother's store. The car was found abandoned later in Durham. Winfred Riley of Durham confessed to authorities as being the driver of the car. He was sentenced to 10 years in state prison at hard labor for his part of the robbery. Besides the robbery, the bank had another problem. It seemed like they had an $18,000 shortage. When a post-robbery audit was conducted, it was found that the bank was short of funds. When the auditor arrived, the cashier handed him his keys and said, "I am through." Then walked out the door. He has since refused to report to assist in any way in clearing up the shortage. He refused to divulge what happened to money, but insisted he kept none for his own. "I have but $6 in the world," he said. Raleigh continued to not say where the money went. They unofficially reported from $15,000 to $40,000 shortage. The cashier was a moderate liver, sticking close to his work, had few outside diversions of religious type. Citizen officials are admittedly at odds about the disappearance of the cash. Circumstances provided him plenty of room to speculate, and reasonable speculation suggests that Raleigh was unlikely to have been alone in the misappropriations. It was definitely determined today that cashier Raleigh was not a blood kinsman of bandit Winford Riley. Both occupied cells in the same cell block in the Orange County Jail. In a Durham Sun article covering the trial, Riley said that the bank had never made a profit, and that the first defaulting came about when he juggled the figures to make it appear the institution was actually making money. He didn't want the bank to fail and tried to keep it going until sometime when it actually made money. Then the losses could gradually be wiped out and his accounts straightened up. He also told her how he made loans to friends which he knew the bank officials would not sanction. He did this because he felt sorry for them. In nearly every instance, the men to whom he made the loans failed him, and he was forced to change his figures to cover the loans. He said the bank had natural losses of $12,000 a year, and with his bogus loans, the total shortage was about $40,000. The grand jury was convened, and they determined that the bank officials had nothing to do with the shortage or the robbery, and that Robert Riley acted on his own. Riley served 2 years in prison. He died in Orange County in March of 1936. The bank was closed in November when Robert Riley confessed and never reopened. It was liquidated by the State Banking Commission. It wasn't unusual for a bank to fail in those years. Here we have headlines: 6 Western North Carolina banks closed today, 4 banks closed in Wayne County, 2 in Newbern, 5 in Rutherfordton. This is some correspondence from the State Banking Commission. Banks closed by year: 1927, 8, 28, 5, 29, 19, 1930, 76, 31, 18. In a report in 1936, since the passage of the Bank Liquidation Act of 1927, a total of 185 banks have been placed in liquidation. This number of liquidation has been completed in 169 banks, including 14 institutions that reopened and are continuing today. 16 still in process of liquidation. The auditor's report in the wake of the robbery reported a cashier shortage of $21,816.57, plus over $26,000 in past due notes. And they had $7,000 in notes more than 1 year past due. $35,000 in past due notes. The liquidation was handled by T.C. Ellis of Cedar Grove. Ironically, he also had an account at the bank. It was eventually determined the bank had a deficit of $48,099. Some delinquent mortgages were resolved in negotiation. There were a lot of chattel mortgages, overdrafts, and loans that were deemed worthless after attempts to collect on them failed. They sold a lot of this debt. They even sold a teller counter and window. Another way they had to cover the deficit was to conduct a stockholder assessment. The stockholders of record were sent bills for payment. $7,200 was raised this way. Of course, there were some who refused to do so. This notice announced a 20% dividend to the creditors of the bank. And it said, according to announcement by E.C. Ellis, which should have been T.C. Ellis, liquidating agent, whose office is located in the Commercial and Farmers Bank building of the city. This was in Mebane. That bank also closed at about this time. That was the first payment of 3. The paragraph below is from a letter to the Wrought Iron Range Company detailing payments made to a claim from them. 3 dividends totaling 39.6%. The total payout to creditors was 39.6 cents on the dollar. Liquidation was completed in 1933. But they were still searching for creditors who were due funds into the 40s. Finally, in 1947, the remaining funds were turned over to the UNC. I think it was $21 and something. The bank building housed the post office after the bank closed. When the post office moved to a new location on US 70, the old building was used as an appliance store, a TV repair shop, guitar lessons, etc. It was demolished in the 80s. This is the land today. This is where the Forest store was. This is where the bank was. As you can see, all of them are gone now. Some remnants remain, however. This table came from the bank. The counter and teller cage and window were found a few years ago. The table, counter cage, and a few smaller artifacts are all that's left of this part of Efland's history. And here's my email address. If you'd like to comment or you have more information about this, I would like to hear it. Thank you.